Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to the second night of the Sheep Conference 2022, bringing resilience and productivity together. My name is Mark Scott. I'm head of CAFRE's Beef and Sheep branch, and I'll chair the event tonight. The webinar is being recorded, and if you have any questions, if you could please put these in the Q&A facility. We'll answer as many as we can tonight when we get to the panel Q&A session after the speakers have all presented. Once again, I want to thank our partners in the conference for their help and assistance in lining up topics and speakers that stimulate thought and transfer knowledge around sustainable and profitable production. Our partners are, of course, Ulster Farmers Union, AFBI, NSA, NIMEA, and the LMC. I talked a little more about our overarching conference theme last week, and you can view a recording of last week's event on the UFU YouTube page. There's also a link to this on the CAFRE website if you navigate to business support and then sheep. But in summary, bringing resilience and productivity together is driven by a number of desired outcomes for the sheep industry: profitability, positive environmental outcomes, and making the best use of our land resource. Tonight's webinar is entitled Resilience Through Health and Environment, and we have a great lineup of speakers to outline, firstly, how we can build further sustainability into upland grazing systems. Secondly, managing sheep nutrition and health to optimize lamb production from pasture. And finally, how to embrace change and become more resilient as a farmer. We have 3 speakers tonight, and the delivery of their talks will hopefully take us up to 9 p.m, leaving around 30 minutes for panel questions. Tonight, we're again joined by Edward Adamson, Regional Development Officer for NSA, who will table the questions to our panel during that session. So now to our first speaker, Jim McAdam. Jim graduated in agricultural science and carried out his PhD on clover management in hill sheep grazing systems. He spent 2 years as pasture agronomist, working on improving the sheep industry in the Falkland Islands, and after that was appointed as Hill Land Research Officer in Northern Ireland. He lectured on upland grazing systems and agri-environment issues at Queen's University. He researched the management and ecology of hill and upland pastures and was involved in many of the early agri-environment schemes and monitoring the impact of those schemes. He started a research program in 1989, integrating trees into sheep grazing systems in Northern Ireland, and now actively promotes silvopasture as a sustainable livestock grazing option. He is an honorary professor at Queen's University, is currently a facilitator for the Ulster Wildlife EFS group in Carn, Glenshane, and advises on sustainable upland grazing, peatland, and climate change related issues. It seems that Jim was one of those people talking about the environment a generation before anyone else, certainly ahead of his time. You're very welcome, Jim. If you want to share your presentation now, I'll hand over to you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in a position to talk to the Sheep Conference this year. And what I'm going to talk about really is about building sustainability and resilience into hill and upland sheep grazing. As the screen shows, my name is Jim McAdam. I've spent most of my career working in agricultural research with AFBI latterly. Then after retirement, I'm still working through Queen's University and working as an associate with Ulster Wildlife. So I have a long experience of working on upland grazing systems, and I have a small farm myself. So really, if you think, sort of set the issue in context, and really to date, hill and upland sheep farming has been seen very much as a struggle by the farmer and by the sheep against a relatively harsh environment, with really the only objective being to try and rear sheep and lamb out of that environment. But really now, as all of you I'm sure are aware, we're in a scenario where we're looking at, we're in a climate change crisis. We're looking at farming have to deliver a whole range of wider objectives. And to be sustainable and resilient, we want to be farming with the environment, not against it, to deliver a product which is saleable, benefits the public good, while at the same time that sustains the quality and resilience of the vegetation to climate change, which is the big issue, of course, which we're all facing. So if we look at the resource we have to try and do that, set that against, we know that we have a challenging environment. We have a diverse variety of soils and vegetation, and that's where probably the challenge of support for hill farming comes in. We're not dealing with the uniform scenario of flat green fields. We're dealing with a multiplicity of vegetation types and a whole diversity of soils. And those soils and landscapes have very high value for the carbon they hold, for the wildlife they contain, and the ecosystem services that they deliver. I mean by that just the sort of all the important things that nature delivers for us. And just to set those in context, just to think of a typical scene, hill or upland scene you might have in Northern Ireland. And if you just think of all the things that we can get from farmland in that scene, right from in the very background, we've got scenery there, of course, we've an attractive scene. Then we have the obvious ones we get from livestock, from crops, from meat and wool or whatever. And we can get timber, or we could get renewable energy. But then also we are delivering other things in that. We're delivering pollinators, which help wider society. In terms of the soil, we're delivering biodiversity, we're delivering carbon storage, we're delivering water purification, the water that seeps through that soil. So on that depends fisheries, depends drinking water, and set against the whole background is our history and our culture built into that, our sense of place and the scenery and people that attracts to the landscape. All of those really, most of the delivery of all those things are in the hands of the farmer, not just the sheep aspects. And that's really what we want to consider this evening. So we want to look at the objectives for delivering some of these outputs from hill land. And the objectives really, first of all, is to provide a nutritional resource for your livestock, because as I want to show, livestock are key to delivery of nearly all those objectives, but they're the key to delivery of the vegetation, and it's that vegetation canopy that really determines the other outputs that we have, whether it's the visual ones or the tangible ones in terms of wildlife and carbon. So we want to create a diverse vegetation canopy structure which encourages wildlife, and we're also managing to maintain that dense vegetation cover to prevent carbon loss. Carbon is coming really to the fore as one of the key issues that we're trying to address within how we see farming go ahead. And that's no more so than in our hills and uplands, where we're sitting on the biggest carbon stocks we have in Northern Ireland. And how do we actually maintain those stocks and help them to grow? Because that's the key to making a much more sustainable and resilient farming industry. At the same time, we want to deliver flood risk mitigation, water quality enhancement, and reduced fire risk from how we manage vegetation. And of course, that will also deliver a sustainable living landscape, which is a reflection and respect of our heritage and culture that has put it there. And my contention is that all those objectives really are compatible. So if we look at them a bit more individually, grazing for livestock, that's what we do as farmers, and that's what we see as our key role. And that certainly is the case, because on that hinges a lot of the delivery of the other objectives. Livestock, as we know, our sheep are selective grazers. They choose the most nutritious plants they have in front of them. And these vary substantially through the grazing season. And of course, as all of you know, the principle of grazing hill and upland vegetation is to match the seasonal growth pattern and availability of that range of plants to the nutritional needs of your livestock. And we're aiming to keep vegetation at a height which keeps it sustainable, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. That in the condition assessment position, that is in a range of about 15 to 30 centimeters vegetation height, whether that be heather or coarse grasses or sedges or whatever. And also key to that, and an important point, is to use healthy, productive stock of the right breed. All the research has shown is that in terms of their foraging ability and their ability to utilize this low quality forage they're eating, some breeds of sheep perform better than others. And we should take that into consideration when we're looking at the type of pasture that we're trying to manage. Manage the ground so that the animals will cover the ground and utilize that pasture. Manage them so that they can tolerate the climate and the environment that are there. And use productive and healthy sheep. If you can get 4 lambs from the same, or if you can get the same output from 3 sheep as you would from 4 less poorly managed ones, go for the 3 sheep because that reduces your emissions by 25%. So we want to look at building that level of efficiency into our grazing systems. We know that all hill vegetation really is a mosaic of different plants, and all those plants are coming into flower and are nutritionally healthy and productive at different times of the year. So in terms of this seasonal variation in quality and variation in ability of nutritive matter, that's how we best control our grazing to manage to make best use of that. We know that, for example, heather is a wintergreen plant, and the young shoots of heather are the most nutritious source of feed early in spring. Heather growth starts usually about 3 weeks. Our grass growth usually starts about 3 weeks after the heather. And once the grass starts to grow, animals will then move off the heather and selectively graze grasses. So we have to take that into consideration when we're looking at how we graze our hills and uplands, and maybe in future build that a bit more into the sort of prescriptive grazing regimes that we have under agri-environment measures. And we know that, for example, rushes and sedges and plants such as bog cotton, they come available later in the season. Rushes are an important component of our hill. They're not all bad. They have a valuable role in that they do store carbon. They have a good root system. They're good for wildlife if they're there in the right proportion. They provide shelter for lambs and stuff. And it's important to, whenever we're thinking of how we manage and control rushes, just to be aware of the rush growth period, how it's not the same as grasses. Rushes start and finish growth later in the season than other grasses and sedges, especially in those wet upland sites. So in terms of our grazing prescriptions, there's a big variation in vegetation, any one hill or any one piece of land, and in the species that are there. And given the variations in growth patterns and feed quality, one grazing prescription for one whole broad habitat type and multiple objectives can never be ideal. So we really do need to take a flexible approach to grazing in terms of the weather, in terms of the stock we use, and to try and get the most out of the plants that we have on the hill while still maintaining that good vegetation cover. And that's really a lesson that when we're going ahead to and thinking about how we support farming and how we target our schemes in the future, it's something to bear in mind, this flexibility. If we're grazing for wildlife, then we know that healthy peatlands support a unique set of plants and animals. They have a very diverse biodiversity, which is very important, and it's very important in a national and European and a global context. And we know that grazed heather and bog vegetation has more wildlife than ungrazed vegetation, and all our research has shown that. Grazing encourages a more diverse vegetation structure, and that increases the attractiveness of the vegetation for insects, for plants, birds, and small animals. And we know we're all familiar just with the diversity that we have and that our hills and uplands can deliver. These plants and animals are really important. Okay, they're nice to look at, they're important for people to go out and see, but they're important parts of the whole natural ecosystem that make it healthy and that make the soil a proper biological functioning sustainable unit. But we know too, as I said from research, that if there's no grazing or undergrazing, you get a dense vegetation canopy, particularly of grasses and so on like that chokes out vegetation lower down. It reduces the diversity of plants, which is at the same time reduces the diversity of insects and biota that you get in the soil to help make it a more sustainable system. So we want to try and maintain healthy, diverse plant cover, and the secret to that really is grazing. We know also that our hill and upland soils are high in organic matter. That means they've got a lot of carbon in them. And that carbon now, increasingly we see, is really the key to how we manage our farming systems in the future. How do we keep that carbon there, and how do we build and store more carbon so that we can help reduce our emissions profile and move towards a net zero type scenario. And in terms of grazing for carbon, then the objective really here is to store carbon and to prevent carbon loss. And peatlands, as I said, are our best store of carbon. We need to retain that carbon to offset our emissions and to make our farms and landscape more climate resilient. Unfortunately, many of our highlands and uplands and soils with high carbon content are in degraded state for various reasons. Historical, a lot of them weather and climate related, because these are areas which get the most extremes of climate and weather. So climate change, where we're getting heavier rain, experiencing heavier rainfall doses, these are all going to make them more vulnerable to loss of carbon, because ironically enough, most of that loss comes through drying out and exposure of bare peat to the sun, and that is when we get carbon loss. The carbon is oxidized into carbon dioxide. So how can we prevent this loss of carbon? Well, once again, the secret is grazing. We don't want to overgraze and trample. As I said, if you get bare soil, any bare soil at all, you're going to lose carbon from the source of that by oxidation. Or if we undergraze and we have the dense vegetation canopy, which leads to space, which leads to a less dense understory vegetation, which helps keep a tight mat of vegetation on the soil surface, because vegetation cover keeps the soil cooler. If you have bare soil and if you've open soil, which is either undergrazed or too overgrazed, that will lose heat to, that will lose gas to the atmosphere, and it will help lose carbon. So we really want to just insulate our bog against our hill and upland soils against the extremes of climate that we're going to get, because our overall aim is to reduce evapotranspiration, and that causes drying out, and retaining soil moisture, where that may be re-wetting soils in some scenarios to keep the soil moisture table about 10 to 15 centimeters below ground level. Just to set this in context a bit, if we think of the need for resilience to weather extremes, we all remember the severe drought we had in the summer of 2018, and that the left-hand graph there shows the AFBI figures for the grass growth rate during that summer. Really a dramatic drop compared to the dotted line is the 10-year average. The red line was the actual for 2018. You can see a huge deficit in summer growth of grass, and this has huge repercussions for fodder conservation and for feeding animals and through to the next year. We might have thought that was just a one-off, but if we look at the once again, if you look at the 2019-2020 averages, there was that deficit as well. The 10-year average in black there shows that we're running below we're running below the 10-year average for the last 3 or 4 years in herbage production, and that's because really of us getting warmer, drier summers, and that's going to have increased problems for plant growth, and it's going to have particularly extreme effects on the hills, where these soils will be more vulnerable to warming up and to the floods that we're likely to get. So the tighter and denser the vegetation cover we keep on our hills, the more resilient they're going to be to weather extremes. So the answer is maintain as dense vegetation cover as possible by the appropriate grazing. And of course, we know that will reduce fire hazard, where we get an accumulation of fuel for fires in terms of drier, ranker vegetation. That's what leads us to the more severe wildfires that we're getting. So grazing can help that substantially, whether by sheep and cattle or not. Water quality and flood risk mitigation is another example of where grazing can deliver sustainable outcomes. We know we've had incidents of bog bursts, for example, where the shallow organic soils and where we get extreme rainfalls, that can actually become dissociated from the bedrock below or the till below, and can actually run down valleys. We need to take into consideration that these type of events are likely to be more frequent in the future, even through natural occurrence or through artificial disturbance of the peatland. and grazing to maintain a dense, consistent surface, and even possibly to plant trees in some of these slopes and valleys at native trees in a type of silvopastoral scenario can help control the stability and prevent soil erosion. I'll just finish up with a mention of the potential for trees in that scenario. There's trees for erosion control, and if you could consider introducing trees somewhere into your grazing system, we know that trees bring substantial proven environmental benefits. They don't have to be planted out there as blocks of conifer afforestation. They can be integrated into your sheep grazing system, can be integrated into your landscape, into valleys and slopes. And the trees, of course, lead to more carbon sequestration. They provide shelter for stock. They provide flood mitigation, and they can help extend the length of the grazing season through the way they stabilize the soil and help percolate the water through it. And as we all know, they increase dramatically the biodiversity that you can find in grasslands in your landscape. So in summary, really, we're talking about sustainable, resilient upland sheep management. First key point is you're aiming to match herbage availability to the needs of your stock. That will help ensure that you have a good even vegetation cover, that you're maximizing the utilization of it throughout the year, yet you're not leading to the detriment of the species diversity that you find there. And if you follow that recommended grazing practice, that will be beneficial to wildlife. But also good grazing management encourages carbon storage, it prevents carbon loss, it reduces your fire risk, and it protects your water regulation supply. Now, and all those, of course, are public goods. They benefit the rest of society, not just farmers. And the key message we have to get across as farmers is that we are delivering those goods that's in our hands, and that we need support to help deliver those goods. And also, as I added the end, consider if you can add some trees into your grazing platform. Those can help substantially increase the delivery of those ecosystem services I was talking about above. And of course, all these are climate resilient measures, which is really underlying what we're trying to develop for upland sheep grazing systems at present. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and I look forward to dealing with any questions or points you want to raise.
Thank you for that, Jim. You very nicely picked up on a point made by Charlie Morgan from last week's session around the necessity for livestock in the upland. Not only that, but healthy and productive livestock. Also important points on the public good delivered by hill farming, ranging far and wide from simply the production of food. Just a reminder to everybody tuned in tonight, your questions go in the Q&A facility. So if I could encourage you to make use of that. If you hover your mouse arrow over the bottom of your screen, the Q&A button will appear, and we'll table those questions after all three presentations have been delivered. On to our second speaker for this evening, and that's Trevor Cook. Trevor has been in farm animal veterinary practice for 40 years, with a more recent focus on preventative and sustainable animal health. In the last 15 years, he has moved into advisory around whole farm production and profit. His veterinary background has given him a very different perspective and understanding of how to support change on the farms he works with. And he currently works with clients throughout New Zealand and now has clients in the UK and Europe. His focus now is supporting profitable but sustainable farming systems, focusing on the process of change as much as the technical knowledge. And so he fits right into the bill for tonight in terms of resilience of farmers and farming systems. He's one of the owners and chairman of a large veterinary business called Totally Vets Limited, based. This company actively works with to help them make them more robust and sustainable. Trevor, so while we'll be ready for our Horlicks after the webinar, he'll be brewing his first. You're very welcome. We look forward to your presentation. If you want to share that on screen now, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. It's really nice to be able to present to you all, and the presentation that you just heard covered a lot of the things that I deal with on farms and the principles of managing pastures, whether they are hilled-in pastures or highly productive flat pastures, are the same. So I'll keep moving and just get most of my lead from the questions that you have. So I'll share. So resilience, I thought I'd just mention first a couple of pictures. So this is a South Island view where sheep are grazing very nice pasture. But when we look at resilience, a key part of resilience is being in control. And in this case, there's obviously a fence across that for those sheep, which is restricting their grazing, which means that there is some control over their allocation. And even in more extensive situations, there's the attempt to do the same thing with
Trevor,
fences.
sorry, can I stop you there? We're not seeing the picture. If you want to,
Okay,
we're just seeing the first slide there.
Okay. You saw the first slide?
Well, we're on the first slide there now, but it's not. It hasn't come up as a slideshow.
Oh, okay. Let me go back. So have you got the first slide now?
It's still not on the slideshow. There's the option of Heather sharing the presentation if you want.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I'm not sure what else to do, so maybe that might be the safest option.
Okay, do you want us to do that, Heather? Yeah, good stuff.
Okay, so if we just move on a slide. So I'm saying that there is control. So an essential part of resilience is being in control. So being in control over the allocation of feed is crucial to resilience. And in this case, obviously, there's a fence which is restricting where those animals graze. Where the next slide is on a more extensive basis, where that same principle applies. In this case, obviously, the fences are not as good, so therefore not as effective, but nevertheless the principle applies in every grazing system involving pastures. Okay, next slide. So just remember that the profit for the world over, for my clients here and for you, it is profits driven by how much you sell and what price you get for that product. But it's balanced against, next slide, the cost of production. So that cost of production is crucial to that whole profit equation. But I think the bit that we forget is it's the ability to repeat that profit. And I'll come back to that, because it's all part of being in control, which is all part of being resilient. Okay. So resilience, if we go back, it's the capacity to manage difficulties, it's to manage to bounce back. So again, the next slide. The ability to get back to where you were. So carry on. So when we look at resilient farming systems, they just without adversity, they are robust. But also it's an integration between what your system is and what you are as a person. The two things have to be. It's a combination of resilient people and resilient systems. Okay. So if we move on. So the features of resilient systems is flexibility. So it's got to be flexibility in systems and in state of mind. And it needs to be, we have to have systems that are varied, and that variation is going to be in stock classes, it's going to be in markets, it's going to be in priorities. And also a key part of resilience is planning. So having planning so you know what the inputs are required, identifying the inputs and planning for those inputs to be implemented. Okay. scheduling those actions. So having some process by which all those actions are part of that plan in a way which they are picked up. So it reduces the chances of mission and also really reduces the exposure that our farming systems have to key person exposure. Okay. And again, coming back to being in control. So knowing what you need to do and being able to prioritize those things that have to be done in terms of their importance and have them planned and scheduled is all part of being resilient. Okay. And compromise. So, okay, next slide. I'm yet to meet the perfect farmer. I work with lots and lots and lots of farmers, and none of them are perfect. Every farmer has to make compromises to make their system work. And I think the ability to make compromise is a key part of resilience, knowing where you can make compromise, where is the compromise that has the least negative impact on outcomes. And it's a key component of resilience. But if we're going to be using compromise and being in control of compromise, we need to know what best practice is. Our target is best practice, and then we can see where within that best practice we have the room to compromise if we need to. Okay. So the rules are the same everywhere. So the rules that I apply, the principles that I apply here for my clients are exactly the same when I'm on farms over your part of the world. So when we look at top performance, the same drivers of top performance apply here just as much as they apply to your systems. Okay. So when we look at pasture, and I won't spend a lot of time on pasture because I think Jim covered that well, some of the principles, and the big one that he mentioned was about the danger of the power of how we graze our pastures. So when we look at pasture, it's a very cheap feed. It does leave it has a very small carbon footprint, and Jim was suggesting that it actually is storing carbon. That's very debatable over our side of the world. And we know that through the management of pasture, through the quantity, the quality, and how we allocate that pasture, we can support very high performance in sheep systems on purely pasture. Okay. So what are the tools? The tools are knowing the demand, calculating what the supply that you have available, using tools to budget that balance between demand and supply. The very underutilized tools that are formalized feed budgets. Subdivision. So having the ability to control the allocation of pastures is by far the most powerful tool to bring resilience to a system. And sitting over top of all that is monitoring, just knowing where you are and knowing what's happening. Okay. So when we look at a flock performance, there are just a very small handful of drivers which are most influential. So, and they are feed and body condition score in our breeding systems. Okay. The feed demand is totally predictable. The day that we put the rams with our ewes, the feed demand for that flock of sheep is absolutely totally predictable for the next 9 months, if not 12 months. So therefore, being able to plan the supply is so easy because we can be so accurate in predicting what the feed demand is going to be. Okay. So when we look at high flock performance, it is all around minimizing the bottom end, feeding only when we need to feed ewes, and underfeeding when we need to. And that's something we might come back to, in that there is a place for underfeeding breeding ewes and as a package of delivering high performance. Okay. Just remember, genetics set the potential, and we can argue and discuss on farms forever about the best genetics, but it's what you do on the farm that delivers the outcome. So the biggest influence is what you do in the management, and that sets how much of that genetic potential that you can capture. Okay. So a productive ewe has high genetic potential. His body condition score at 3, and we might come back if people ask questions, at mating and at lambing. She's fed well at mating and before she's lambed, and then fed once she's lambed. 90% of the production outcome is from that. So when we look at the perfect package, okay, so ewes are in condition score 3 or more at mating, that they're not losing condition at mating. So we talk a lot about flushing, but in actual fact for ewes that are condition score 3 or so, it's all about not losing condition. When they're on pastures, we need to try and minimize the amount of fungal toxins that they'll take in. So if we've got ryegrass or similar grass systems, we know that there will be fungal toxins which can have a negative effect on ovulation rates, and they need to be mated by an awesome ram team. So just remember that ram team. I think they're a forgotten part of it. The day you put the rams out, the first mating that a ram has and the sperm that comes out of that ram started its journey as a sperm 8 weeks before. So that ram team has to be treated extremely well from 8 weeks before mating if we expect them to be in a maximum fertility or fertilizing capability the day we put them out. Okay. And at the other end is those ewes, pregnant ewes, in the last 35 days before they lamb do not lose condition. I put that 35 days before the start of lambing as one of the most crucial days in our sheep production calendar, no matter where we are, whether they're being fed concentrates, whether they're on pasture. We know that if a multiple ewe loses condition in the 35 days before she lambs, every aspect see. How does that stop?
What's happened, Trevor?
I don't know, but I've got rid of it.
Okay.
It's gone. Yeah. So we're back to where we were.
Okay. Can you not see the slide?
No, I've come back to my slides.
Okay. Heather, do you want to bring the presentation down and reshare it? What do you see now, Trevor?
Just my slides.
Okay. Do you want to try sharing your slides or?
Yeah.
Again.
So you're still not seeing my slides?
Not yet.
I'll end the slideshow and start again. It tells me I'm sharing my screen. Is that right?
Yeah. So if you hit slideshow now and see what we can see.
Okay.
No. No. Do you want to try just? Do you want to try just going down through the slides as they are there?
Right. Yeah, can you see? Can you see those? Oh,
yep.
Okay. Okay. We'll do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Good. So that 35 days is an absolutely key date in any sheep breeding system, and those. So when we look at that perfect package, those ewes a body condition score 3 or better when they lamb. So when we look at what drives that production, it is captured in those factors. So a high scanning percentage, body condition score, the golden 20 days, which I've coined. So 10 days before mating and 10 days into mating, we're shifting our ewes on pasture on a frequent basis. So we're giving them choice, and that is about minimizing any chance of them losing condition over that time. and also minimising their intake of fungal toxins which might be in those pastures. But what's sitting behind that are our gimmers or our tudus, which are our largest stock class in our breeding ewes, and very often our lowest performing. They need to be at least 90% of mature weight of our mature ewes. We need to have hogs or hoggets coming into the flock that were heavy enough to reach estrus before their first winter. That delivers us predictably higher performance in those ewes. And absolutely the tail end, a number of ewes that are light conditions set the level of performance that we'll get. Selenium is important, and I know over your way, red buckets and yellow buckets and other coloured buckets out with stock are very, very common without any knowledge of what animals need. But of those trace element supplements all over the world, the one which is very often deficient, which has an impact on reproductive performance, is selenium. Some fungal toxins, and I've already talked about those rams and the importance from 8 weeks before mating. So when we get a high percentage, we usually have a lot more ewes carrying more than one lamb, which can create another production bottleneck, which is lamb survival and weaning weights. So when we look at weaning weights, lamb survival, 10 to 20% of lambs die within 4 days of being born. It could be and is seen as a welfare issue, and it's very variable between flocks, and we very usually just blame the weather for those variable outcomes. But I'm suggesting we have much more control over that. So this is a saying that I quote forever, and it's from Kathy Dwyer from Scotland, who did a study looking at what drives lamb survival. And she says that if a lamb stands and suckles within 20 minutes of being born, it has a 95% chance of still being alive in 90 days, which says that what we do to our ewes coming into lambing, the single most important outcome is how vigorous that lamb is when it's born. So a vigorous lamb, for that lamb to stand up in 20 minutes, it's birth weight. So if we're going to deliver light lambs, particularly for those triplets, those lambs will be less vigorous. But body condition score and feeding are the biggies. Ewes that are below condition score 3, their lambs will take longer to stand up. If those ewes have lost condition in the 35 days before lambing, their lambs will take longer to stand up. When you look at the impact of weather, the impact of weather is very related to how vigorous those lambs are at birth. So a late pregnant ewe needs energy. We know that vegetative pasture in late pregnancy can supply that energy, and we do that largely with fast speeding rotations up, with set stocking close to lambing, so we've got control over the allocation of feed to those ewes. So when we look at then weaning weight, lamb growth rate, so to me they're icing on the cake, and most of that growth is in late lactation, in the second half of lactation, as the milk production from those ewes starts to drop off. And remember that 70% or more of the feed that a lamb consumes between birth and weaning is pasture. So when you look at those early growth rate and the milk production of the ewe, high milk production is requires that ewe to be. Milk production is driven by body condition score and feeding before lambing, and having feed at peak lactation. So the time of peak lactation is very predictable. That's when those ewes have the highest demand. It's a predictable demand. We know when that demand is going to be, and so being able to supply feed at that time is crucial to getting maximum milk production from our ewes. So we've already been through that, 35 days before lambing. So if those multiple ewes lose condition in that 35 days, they will produce less colostrum, they'll have a lower lactation curve, as well as their lambs will be slower to stand up. For our suckling lamb, it's a full ruminant at 8 weeks. So up to 8 weeks, it is not a full ruminant. For it to grow fast, it has to have a diet that's at least 12 ME, which we know milk is. If they're to carry on growing, after peak lactation, when their intake of milk decreases daily for a multiple lamb, that pasture has to be high quality if we want those lambs to carry on growing fast. So we know from work over your way that ewe lactation performance after 56 days has little influence on weaning weight, so that pasture quality. And we also know that lambs weaned around 60 days onto high quality pasture can grow very fast. Pasture quality, pasture quality, pasture quality. So when we look at those bits that can't be compromised, if we want to maintain high performance, we have to be able to look at how we can maintain body condition, focusing on the bottom end. In the end, the overall result will be driven by how many ewes are below condition score 3 at those critical times. We have to know that they've got a positive energy balance at mating and a positive energy balance coming into lambing. Those are the bits that cannot be compromised if we want to have control and consistency over flock performance. So resilience in health is knowing the essentials. We've got some essential inputs like vaccines, for example. Know what our trace element status is, so we're supplementing what we need to supplement and not waste money on supplementing with things that we don't need. We're sure that the inputs that we have are based on demonstrated need, not just on feeling good. And a lot of stuff is given to animals because it makes us feel good. It doesn't give us any production benefits. Schedule all those inputs to make sure they do happen. Usually there is little room for compromise, but knowing where we can compromise is important to make effective and less cost compromise. So resilience, know the key points of influence, plan, schedule the inputs. So I have a spreadsheet which schedules all those actions in terms of getting maximum performance out of our ewe flock. And I have management charts, which I do for my clients, which highlights and schedules those actions, both feeding and animal health inputs, to make sure that minimises omission and makes it more certain that things will happen. That's it.
Thank you, Trevor. Do you want to take your stop sharing your screen?
Yeah.
Thank you, Trevor. There's some great messages there that can be picked up in the panel discussion later. Perhaps a few glitches just getting Trevor's slides over the equator there, folks, but thankfully we got all the information in the end. A good point, Trevor, I think that I picked up, especially from that your presentation. Compromise is okay, but you have a choice over where to make that compromise within your system. Also, it's good to see continuity in the messages between last week's speakers and this week's, but it's managing the simple things that can make all the difference in sheep production systems. Body condition score and feeding are the simple keys, according to Trevor there. Again, everyone, it's just a reminder to put your questions for Trevor and our other speakers in the Q&A facility. I mentioned last week that after hearing from the experts, it's always great to have the input of someone who has or is currently implementing that advice on the ground. Tonight, our farmer contributor is a sheep farmer who is implementing a lot of proven good practice and some cutting-edge innovation on his farm. However, his input tonight is focused not so much on his sheep production credentials, but on his journey of change since taking over the farm from his father and adapting it and himself to stay relevant, focused, profitable, and sustainable. This man and his farm business are an excellent example of resilience. Our final speaker for this evening is Dale Orr. Dale farms near Strangford, County Down, where he runs a flock of 460 purebred clean ewes, 100 sucker cows, and 150 growing and finishing beef animals. Dale returned home to the family farm after completing an accountancy degree at Glasgow University. Dale supplies lambs to the Tesco Cost of Production Scheme and is a member of the National Sheep Association Committee. You'll hear shortly how much Dale is focused on gaining and sharing knowledge. He's a member of a CAFRE Business Development Group. He's also a CAFRE Technology Demonstration Farmer, or TDF, for sheep grassland management, and is currently a project farmer participating in a European Innovation Partnership project. Thanks for joining us tonight, Dale. I'll now pass over to you, please.
Hello, my name's Dale Orr. I'm farming near Downpatrick in County Down. I'm farming 500 acres with organic beef and organic sheep. My philosophy is to keep the animals at grass 365 days of the year if possible, and if they're not at grass then they're eating other forage crops, like these sheep are eating forage turnips, and I have cattle on kale as well. I'm working with clean bred ewes. I have around 450. And I keep them pure because it's easy to breed my own replacements, because I have a close flock and I believe that's very important to maintain a high health status. And I breed my own replacements. The clins are particularly good because they have a natural worm tolerance as well, so I don't need to use much anthelmintics. And I'm working pretty much on a clover-based system. That means I don't have to buy any nitrogen, and it reduces my input costs. We've been organic now since 1998, so we're working with white clover, red clover. And we've also introduced herbal A's in the recent times. The herbal A's are terrific because it means I don't have to use too many anthelmintics, and it reduces the worm burden in my lambs going forward. So this is a typical silage sward on the farm. It's basically red clover, perennial ryegrass mix. It contains two Pacific red clovers, Aberclard and Aberchianthe, and they're bred to last at least 5 years. We also use this sward for fattening lambs in the autumn, and it's perfect for the ewes at lambing time. So the ewes would be out here during the day and they're getting the high protein in the clovers, and then they're into the shed at night just for an ease of management for ourselves. Hello, my name's Dale Orr, and I'm delighted to be asked to speak to you this evening. I came home to the family farm in 1996 after completing a degree in accountancy at Glasgow Uni. At that time, my father was growing around 250 acres of cereals. He had around 300 crossbred ewes and 60 suck cows. Anyway, after about a year or so, it became clear to me that I wasn't going to get rich quick if we continued farming the way we were. I wondered what I should do to improve my own circumstances, and I started to look around for opportunities. Then, in the early summer of 1998, our local cereal advisor called into the farmyard, and he told us of a new grant scheme that was opening up, the organic farming scheme. He knew our farm well, and he felt that the transition to organic farming wouldn't be too difficult for us. Further, there was a generous 5-year conversion grant, and good premiums were currently being paid for organic beef, lamb, and cereals. After a few weeks' consideration, my father and I decided it was worth a try. We reseeded the winter cereal ground that had just been harvested with a white clover ley, and contacted the organic farming advisors at Greenmount College, who provided us with all the rules and regulations relating to organic farming. The next 2 years were incredibly busy. There was much to learn. What was permitted and not permitted. For the first time in my farming career, everything had a plan and an order. Why? Because the organic certifiers demanded it as part of their standards. I had to have a 5-year rotation, and I had to record everything. What was sown, when it was sown, how much manure or slurry was added to each field, how many round bales of hay, silage, or straw were harvested from each field. The organic records really give you a complete overview of the whole farm. If a field yielded less than the other fields, well, this prompted you to examine why and do something about it. By November 2000, our home farm had completed the conversion. Organic beef was still a very good price, paying an 80 pence per kilo premium. We had increased the beef cows now to 120, and had purchased an Aberdeen Angus bull to breed our own replacements. Similarly with the sheep, we had purchased a nucleus flock of 100 clin ewes, as we felt that their natural characteristics were beneficial to our new organic farming methods, and we started to breed our own replacements. We were growing organic wheat, oats, and barley, but we couldn't find a market for these cereals, so we switched to growing oats alone. It was the easiest cereal to grow, as the weeds were naturally suppressed by the oats. Then in 2002, a local chicken processor called into the farmyard. He was looking for a farmer to supply him with organic poultry directly on contract. My father and I agreed we would give it a go. I had looked after a dozen or so chickens when I was a schoolboy and had sold the eggs to the local spar, and I didn't mind looking after them. Within a few months, we were producing 800 birds a fortnight, and the appearance of over 3,000 birds, free ranging over a 5-acre field, was getting plenty of public attention. Local people started calling into the farmyard to ask questions about them and ask where they could buy them. I told this to the contractor, and he agreed that I could have 6 birds per week at a cost price and sell them to anyone who called in. Within a short space of time, 6 birds became 12 birds per week, and this made me think, if I can sell a dozen birds per week without any advertising, what was the potential market for them? I found out that a farmer's market had recently been established at St. George's Market in Belfast. I brought a dozen birds the first week and I sold them all. The farmer's market was twice a month and I built up a regular customer base, a lot of whom suggested to me that they would buy other organic meats from me if I had them available. To investigate this further, I attended an introduction to farm butchery event in England and listened to talks from a number of different farmers who had started retailing their own meat. Their basic business model was the farm box. They didn't just sell one product, but a range of products within a box so that they could sell the entire animal and weren't left with any excess meat. Organic beef, lamb and pork were all sold in this way. When I returned home, I couldn't find a butcher to cut up and package the meat for me, but my customers for organic chickens continued to ask me for more organic meat. I decided to learn butchery and do the job myself, so I enrolled in a 1-day-a-week course at the local tech. On the 1st of March 2005, I opened my farm shop. Initially, I had thought that butchery would be a 3-day-a-week business. I would open on a Thursday morning and close the door on a Saturday evening. This would leave me free to farm the rest of the week. However, soon the butchery business took on a life of its own. Within a short space of time, I was selling a good volume of meat through the farm shop and at St. George's Market. I became more confident as a butcher and decided to enter some competitions. In the summer of 2007, I was a winner in the Taste of Britain food competition and was invited to an awards ceremony at Highgrove, Prince Charles's estate, to collect my award. The BBC News team heard about this and I was featured on the BBC Newsline programme. After appearing on TV, my customer base continued to grow and I soon found that I could sell a significant amount of meat on a Saturday morning. After this success, I was now at a level that I could employ a butcher. I soon found someone appropriate. This, I hoped, would give me more free time to develop the business and also let me have some time on the farm, because I was aware that my father was carrying the full responsibility of getting things done. I now had some time to set up a website, and this I did, and once established, the orders started to trickle in. Meat was sent vacuum packed and chilled in polystyrene boxes to customers' homes. Although the website didn't provide us with a lot of revenue initially, it was a great signpost for the business. It was probably responsible for a number of TV shows contacting me. The first one was RTE. Their nationwide programme did a feature on the farm shop and the website. This was essentially free advertising for me and resulted in a number of orders, some of which became significant regular customers. Over the next few years, I featured in a number of TV shows, including The Great British Menu, The Fabulous Food Programme with Jenny Bristow and Barry McGuigan, and the first season of UTV's Rare Breed. I sought new markets for my meats, and I started supplying burgers and other low-value cuts into food discount stores, restaurants, and fast food outlets. These sales were essential to me because I found that my persistently loyal customers only purchased the high-value cuts. My problem now was that I was perceived to be a high-end food producer, and customers did not see my meats as something they could purchase on each week, but only for special occasions. I needed to sell as much minced sausages and burgers as possible in order to maintain a fresh stock of fillet, sirloin and ribeye steak to satisfy the demand for these products. The economic recession made trading difficult through 2009, and a number of businesses that I supplied were closed. I renovated the website and spent some money on website advertising and other promotional activity. And these improvements proved effective, and we were soon sending significant amount of meat all over the British Isles. However, 2010 proved a difficult year for a lot of businesses. Many other businesses that I supplied closed, and I was also conscious that I was spending very little time on the farm. At the start of 2011, my father told me that he intended to retire at the end of the year, so I had to decide what I wanted to do. I said that I would spend the next 6 months trying to increase website sales further and simplify the business. However, over the next 6 months, online sales did not increase to the necessary volumes. I was always busy, but I couldn't expect one employee to fulfill all the roles that I carried out, and there wasn't a sufficient margin to employ more than one person. At the end of June, I told my butcher that we would be closing at the end of August. He was very decent about it and stayed with me to the very last day. I closed the doors to the shop for the last time on the 3rd of September 2011. I knew it was the right decision, and I looked forward to the challenge of running the farm. But before that, there was a small matter of the Rugby World Cup in New Zealand. I'm fortunate to have a brother based in Auckland, and he had purchased tickets for the two of us to attend all the matches in Eden Park. So off I went to New Zealand. I really enjoyed my time out there and was fortunate to get the opportunity to visit a number of really good farms. These guys were farming without subsidies, profitable, and their whole focus was getting the most they possibly could from grass. When I got home, I was keen to copy what I had witnessed in New Zealand. Michael Doherty, my local department advisor, helped me get set up. He loaned me a plate meter and he showed me how to measure grass and make the most of it. Initially, my focus was on the cows in the beef enterprise. By this time, we had 125 cows, plus all followers, and around 200 ewes. I reduced the average weight of the cows to 650 kilos and purchased a couple of Hereford bulls with good EBVs for terminal and maternal traits, and measured everything I could, like how much grass each field grew, daily live weight gains, days of grass, weaning efficiency scores, and of course financial performance. After a few years, it became clear to me that the sheep were outperforming the cattle, so I changed my focus to the sheep. From 2006, my father had started selecting new lambs from milky mothers who had 2 or 3 lambs that had lambed themselves without any assistance. Over time, he had noticed that there was a huge reduction in the number of ewes that needed assistance at lambing, and there was an increase in the lamb numbers born. I had continued to follow my father's methods, and the sheep performance continued to improve. I started to keep more ewe lambs and slowly increased the ewe numbers and reduced the cow numbers accordingly. Keen to learn more, I started to attend my local business development group. This proved to be a great experience. Each meeting consisted of visiting one of the farmers in the group, and he explained his approach to sheep farming, what details he focused on, what problems he had encountered, and how he had resolved them. I always learned something from each farmer and brought some new ideas home to try. Attending these meetings encouraged me to purchase data recording software and a handheld computer device that could provide all the relevant information of each sheep. I learned how to take my father's ewe selection method to the next level. When a lamb was born, I recorded its date of birth, its birth weight, whether it was a single, double, or a triplet. I recorded whether its mother needed assistance at lambing and gave her a score for milkiness and mothering ability, and linked all this information to the EID tag. I can now easily measure and record 4-week weights, 8-week weights, weaning weights, and measure daily growth rates on a regular basis to see how they were performing. All this information provided incredibly beneficial to me in measuring and improving performance over the next few years. One evening at my local sheep BDG meeting, we were introduced to multi-species swords by a speaker from a grass seed company. He had told us about a successful Chuggis trial that had demonstrated that lambs in a multi-species sward grew faster and required less worming than lambs in ryegrass lays. I decided to establish one of my own, and I soon found that my own lambs reared exclusively on multi-species swards grew 12% faster and finished 26 days sooner than lambs in white clover ryegrass lays. They were cleaner too, and most were finished without needing to be treated for worms. Further, the sward itself grew very well and yielded over 11 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, which was above my farm average of 10 tonnes. The next year, I established another 25 acres, and I had my ewes and lambs grazing it within 7 weeks of sowing. My only negative was the sheep continued to refused to eat the ryegrass component of the sward from midsummer onwards. This meant that the paddocks needed to be regularly topped, or I had to follow the sheep around the paddocks with cattle to clean them out properly. So in 2020, I decided to establish a sward with no ryegrass at all, simply red clover, white clover, chicory and plantain. Research on the internet suggested that Kiwi lamb finishers were achieving growth rates of 400 grams per day on it without any concentrates. My results so far have been encouraging. I have regularly been achieving growth rates of 350 grams per day without concentrates, but I think my sheep may be genetically inferior to the Kiwi sheep, so this is something I intend to improve in the future. My land is very light, free draining soil. This makes it excellent for overwintering sheep on grass or forage turnips. However, the disadvantage of such land is that it is prone to drought. We have had 3 dry springs in 3 of the last 4 years, with very little rain coming from April through to the start of August. I guess this is a result of climate change, and this pattern is set to continue. My experience with the multi-species swards has encouraged me to establish a new sward. I have replaced ryegrass in the sward with cocksfoot, meadow fescue and timothy. Together with red clover, white clover, chicory and plantain, the theory is that these plants are all deep rooted and should be able to source water deeper down when the weather is dry. This year, I'm going to try a number of different species as well to see if I can enhance my lamb's performance further. I intend to sow burnet, yarrow, sheep's parsley, and birchfoot trefoil, and we'll see how they do this year. Predicting the future is as difficult as forecasting the weather. In order to succeed, I feel I'm going to have to keep on improving by continuously maximizing returns from grass, developing the use of my multi-species swards, and making further genetic improvements to my sheep. I intend to start breeding my own rams because it is virtually impossible to purchase performance recorded Clin rams in Northern Ireland. Farming in Northern Ireland is always a challenge, and we need to be resilient to meet that challenge. In order to make a reasonable income, I have spent the last 25 years constantly learning new skills and continually evolving our farm's methods of production. I feel that this evolution is set to continue. Who knows what the future holds, but my personal view is that the best way forward is to farm in an environmentally sensitive way. I know that I have benefited financially by farming this way over the last 23 years. I have received organic premiums for my products and financial support through different environmentally focused grant schemes. Greenhouse gas emissions are going to be a focus for legislators, and as farmers we have the potential to take advantage of this and use our land not only for food production but for carbon sequestration by farming in an environmentally sensitive way. I would like to thank you again for this invitation to speak, and I hope that you find it interesting. I have enjoyed my career in farming so far,
and I'm looking forward to the challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Dale. Some excellent examples of embracing change, not just doing tomorrow what was done yesterday and the day before, but taking on the challenge of doing things in a different way, and sometimes even doing something completely different. Also an important point that if something's not working for your business, stop doing it. A tough decision that Dale had to make for his farm shop. Regardless of policies and legislation, it's clear that as an industry, we're all going to have to adopt this type of attitude and look for the opportunities within the challenges placed in front of us. Folks, now it's over to you and the panel. If you do have any burning questions, there is still time to put them through on the Q&A facility. So at this point, I'm going to invite Edward Adamson to table the questions to our panel. So if Dale, Trevor and Jim, you could turn on your cameras, please, I'll hand over to Edward.
Thank you for that, Mark. Yeah, well, I suppose we'll take the speakers in the same order that that they spoke. Few questions for Jim. One is here, re-wetting peatlands. Is it likely to leave that land unstable?
Very relevant question, Edward, because just at this very minute, I'm sitting in the Highlands of Scotland where we're out looking with some farmers from Northern Ireland looking at re-wetting and some of the options and looking at the practicalities of it. And no, I don't think so. And I think here the skill is in re-wetting is, yes, keeping the water table in our peatlands, not creating floods and not creating lakes that lambs will drown in, but it's getting the water table up to about 15 centimeters below the ground surface. And we've seen that to do that requires, it's not just simply going out with willy-nilly with a digger, it requires a bit of hydrological input and a bit of expert advice and the use of things like LiDAR, which will give you an idea for the peatland where the water will move. And when you do that, then you can do your re-wetting, do your drain blocking if necessary on land. And a lot of our drains that were done in the 60s and 70s, and they're old drains and they're already growing full of moss and they're already sequestering carbon. But it's selecting those and blocking the water to the extent that it raises the water table below. It doesn't create lakes that drowns lambs, and that will help deliver us to sort of it'll reduce the carbon emissions from that, and it will lead us down to a position where we're actually sequestering carbon from those peatlands. And I think that's possible and capable, and we're seeing some of those examples here in Scotland, and we're testing some examples as well. In Fermanagh, we've done some work on that, and up at Glenwherry, we've done some work on that. And I think re-wetting is something that's come into our dictionary the last couple of years, and it's the top of everybody's agenda. And I think as we talk more about it and see the practicalities and the benefits of it, we'll see that it can go hand in hand with profitable sheep farming, because you're delivering public goods and environmental outputs, which are really going to make sheep farming viable on the hills as we go ahead.
Well, just one more before I leave you, Jim. Question on overgrazing on the hill. We know that hill sheep are quite territorial, but if they're overgrazing part of a hill and staying on it, what's your suggestion to give that part of the hill a chance?
Thanks, Edward. And I saw another question in there about virtual grazing, where you put the radio collars on sheep and control that, and that has been proved very successful in cattle. I was just down 2 months ago down the Wicklow Hills, where they had radio collars fitted to cows, and there were farmers who were just using that. They weren't treating it as some modern research tool. We talked to the farmer about it, and he just pulled out his phone and he says, "Oh, there, I see where my cows are. That's fine, where they are and everything are." And if we can get that sort of technology into sheep, because what we're dealing with in the hills is a mosaic of vegetation. Every hill we have is a whole mixture of different vegetation types, some of which we want to graze harder than others, some of which we want to keep animals off. To try and fence that's impossible. And agri-environment schemes try to block that all into one single prescription, which doesn't fit and doesn't work in delivering environmental variables. So I think, yes, the questioner's point was very relevant in that some animals will selectively graze more, and even genetically, and I feel like their intuition is to go and graze more areas. I think we have a future in just economically justifying virtual grazing with sheep if you look at the wider picture of what it will deliver on these mosaics, rather than trying to, fencing's expensive. Okay, we say collars are expensive, those will come down. I don't think the cost of fencing will ever come down. And I think it is a future to look at this electronic control of sheep grazing and adapting to animals' habits and to the traditional ways that animals have grazed on the hill.
Thanks for that, Jim. There's loads more questions for you, but I think we'll move around to everyone and maybe come back to you later. Trevor, you brought this question upon yourself because some of the audience asked the question. I was thinking it. Could you expand a bit on endophytes, these nasties?
Okay, well, ryegrasses all around the world have the potential to have fungal infections, and they're endophytes, so they live inside the cells, particularly when ryegrass gets under stress, dry stress. They produce toxins, which over here we see as ryegrass staggers, with a toxin called lolitrum, and that does occur in other parts of the world. They produce a toxin called ergovaline, which is a heat stress, and we know that ergovaline has a negative effect on ovulation rate. So I and certainly my experience with what I've seen, particularly in Scotland, where ryegrasses are very dominant, that these fungal endophytes certainly have the potential to have a negative effect on performance. And they're very hard to measure. Our tools for measuring them are very, very poor. So it is really a matter of maybe accepting that if we've got ryegrass-based forage and that's what they're grazing, there is value in trying to, for that crucial time for ewes, to minimise their intake, because by choice they won't eat pastures that are high in endophyte levels. And if we don't give them the choice, they have to eat them. But if we give them the choice, they will avoid them. So it goes hand in hand with making sure that they're in a positive energy state coming into and over the first part of mating.
Right. Thanks.
Edward, could I just ask?
Yes, yes, Jim.
Trevor, I was involved before I retired in managing a ryegrass breeding program in Northern Ireland. And one of the things we were looking at was actually introducing endophytes into the breeding program for ryegrasses. So are there positive benefits of endophytes that might be beneficial to pastures here?
I'm sure there are, and we know that the endophytes that are in our hill country pastures are there to protect them against insect predation. But we also know that they can have a negative effect on particularly sheep or livestock performance. And there are thousands of endophytes which we don't know about. And I think there's a huge opportunity yet to be discovered of how we might harness those endophytes for enhancing production. So yes, it's an unexplored area.
Thanks.
So you're entering into the unknown a bit there. Something that you will know, Trevor, that maybe some of us over here in Northern Ireland don't know, but we know our own typical grass, typical growth rates, lamb growth rates from grass. And what do you expect the average New Zealand farm to produce grams of lamb per day?
Okay, it's highly variable. And so we have hill country farms where lambs are out on hill country pasture, which is never ever going to be in really high quality. So given the challenges that they'll have over the summer of heat and lower quality feed and worm larval challenge, 80 grams a day would be quite, would be the expectation. Whereas if we come into our specialist finishers that are grazing them on clovers and herbs and crop barley, forage barley, live weight gains of 250 to 300. To be getting over 300 would be exceptional. And we've got to remember that for ruminants and particularly lambs, when it gets hot, no matter what we offer them, they will have a lower intake. So one of our challenges as we get warmer is that ruminants by choice don't like getting warmer. And the most measurable impact of them getting warmer is they have a lower appetite, so therefore a lower growth rate.
Thanks for that, Trevor. I think we should move on. Time is pressing here, but you give Dale a bit of a grilling here. Dale, you're increasing your multi-species, species quite a bit over every year. You're increasing more and more. It would appear to me they must be easy to establish, or have you any problems getting a multi-species swards established?
I've no real problems getting them established now. I will be reseeding every year. I would sow between 25 to 30 acres with forage brassicas for the cattle, for overwintering the cattle. So basically, this ground is reseeded then with the multi-species sward in the spring. I'm growing more and more of it because we're getting drier and drier springs, and these plants are all deep rooted, so it's providing me with forage in the dry summers when my ryegrass isn't growing because I can't get to the water. And not only that, the lambs have been performing really well on them. So again, it's another reason for growing as much of them as possible.
Well then, connected to that, we have a question here about trace elements on brassicas and these types of things. Are you doing any blood tests on the elements?
I'm not doing any blood testing, but historically iodine has been a problem grazing cattle with the forage brassicas. So we would put iodine tablets in the water in the drinking troughs, and the cattle would obviously get their iodine from that. And not only that, all animals are given a cobalt, selenium, iodine bolus as well. So we're sort of a double whammy. They're getting iodine in the water plus a cobalt, selenium, iodine bolus.
Thanks for that. Just then, we've heard your journey through farming and a number of changes, drastic changes you have taken along the way. Any tips on how to manage change or when to decide to change?
I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I always made changes when I felt the need to make a change. And sort of circumstances came across, and I was always open to change and willing to make a change. And if I saw there was an opportunity to improve my own personal circumstances by making the change, then I did it. I was never afraid to make any change or what anybody else would say. And I was very lucky to have the support of my family and my father especially, who allowed me to make these changes.
Right, well, just Trevor is a long way away. We'll make use of him when he's here. I have a question here about grazing older broken mouth ewes. If they're coming through their pregnancy in good order and in good form, are they likely still to perform well, or is just will old age get to them?
Absolutely, they can perform well. And what farmers do all over the world is they feel sorry for these sheep and they feed them too much. They're overfed, and they very often are fed on the most inappropriate forage. So metabolically, those sheep, they tend to have a high ovulation rate, so they tend to have a lot of lambs in them, and they are metabolic, and so they're very to be put onto the most inappropriate feed, particularly where that feed is pasture. So I believe that older ewes can successfully
I'm not sure whether anybody's the problem I have or not, but I seem to have lost Trevor.
Yeah, I think he got the point across there anyway, Edward.
Yes, well, that's what I'm thinking. I hear Mark is coming in. I suppose he's going to give me the bit. It's coming near time that we had come to an end. So with that,
Even if you've one more question, even for Jim there, if you had a few, there were quite a lot for Jim, perhaps further, Edward.
there was a few for Jim. I think, well, there was one was when we're grazing silvopasture and grazing amongst trees, there'll be leaf fall and such like. Is there any benefit in feed value and leaves that fall?
Absolutely. And there's been some very good work done by the Organic Research Centre in England looking at leaf fall, fodder and clippings, tree hedge clippings and so on. And they've found huge reductions in methane emissions from animals that are fed those. And leaves, particularly willow leaves and ash and other leaves, have very good nutritional benefit, and all that's published. And I can send you the references to those, Edwin. You can circulate them to the attendees if you wish. But the big benefits seem to be in methane emission reductions from feeding leaves and small twigs that you get on trees in that pasture situation. Of course, the other big benefit of silvopasture is the extension of the grazing season. You can keep animals out longer, and that way you're reducing your ammonia emissions and so on. And I'll just give a quick answer to and the question you asked, Dale. My grandfather always used to say, the time to change in farming is when everybody else is getting out of something, you get into it.
Okay.
Yeah, we've heard that often. I think probably it is time now for me to hand back to Mark.
Yes, thank you very much, Edward, for taking that session. And thank you, Trevor, Jim and Dale. Some really good topics explored there. For those who want to see or hear more about Dale's farm, just a wee plug for Dale and to go into maybe to some more detail about the technical aspects of sheep grassland management. If you're in a business development group, talk to your CAFRE advisor about visiting virtually or live. And if you're not in a business development group, check out the TDF page on the CAFRE website for more details. Outside groups, such as Ulster Farmers Union groups and others, can also be accommodated through the TDF scheme. Once again, thank you to all our speakers tonight. And from the first night last week, there have been some excellent messages delivered, and I think our speakers have delivered to their brief and have productivity together. Thanks to you, the audience, for your time and participation in tonight's proceedings. And please keep an eye out for more upcoming webinars from CAFRE and Ulster Farmers Union. Could I encourage you also to keep an eye on the news and events page on the CAFRE website for a Northern Ireland Sheep Programme webinar on lambing management, which takes place at 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 3rd of March. Registration details will appear there in the next week or so. Finally, can I ask that you please remain online for a few seconds after the and give us your feedback. This important will help us in the development of future that address your needs. So I'd really encourage you. Many thanks, and I hope to see you all soon again, either in person at a live knowledge transfer event or online. Thank you.